This map shows the deeply conservative voting record of North Dakota. Yet, sitting right in the middle of this deep red state is the only state-owned bank and the only state-owned grain mill in the entire country. To understand how these left-wing institutions wound up here, we have to look back to the late 19th century. The federal government wanted to expand the nation westward, but the Dakota Territory was practically empty. It lacked the population and the infrastructure to actually be economically viable. To solve this, Washington gave away millions of acres of free land to massive corporate monopolies. Companies like the Northern Pacific Railroad were handed huge swaths of the territory so they could borrow money to build a transcontinental railway. This region functioned as a manufactured corporate project designed to import a massive human labor force to service the new rail lines. State officials and railroad executives flooded the public with marketing materials promoting the myth of North Dakota. They sold the image of a pristine garden, promising that anyone willing to work hard would be rewarded with their own thriving farm and home. The Great Northern Railroad took this marketing campaign global. They set up recruitment agencies across Germany and Scandinavia, offering to ship entire families over at incredibly low costs. They explicitly targeted tight-knit, traditional agricultural communities. Tens of thousands of Scandinavian immigrants and ethnic Germans who had been living along the Volga River in Russia packed up and took the offer. This chart shows the population of the Dakota Territory between 1870 and 1890. In just 20 years, the number of residents spiked from under 12,000 to over 328,000. These families arrived believing they were finally achieving their dream of land ownership. In reality, they had been imported by a monopoly to work as the biological engine of a massive agricultural machine. When these immigrants finally arrived and broke the soil, the garden they were promised turned out to be a freezing, subhumid grassland. Families lived in tiny houses made of packed earth with dirt floors. They immediately fell into a three-part economic trap: railroads to ship wheat, out-of-state banks to finance seed, and corporate mills that artificially lowered grain prices. The profits were entirely siphoned off to distant cities, locking farmers in a cycle of perpetual debt. Over decades, this relentless financial extraction forged a deep, unified resentment. Across the isolated rural plains, anger crystallized against the corporate hubs of Minneapolis and St. Paul. By designing a hyper-efficient system to extract wealth, the railroad and banking executives had inadvertently gathered a massive, highly cohesive population of exploited workers who had absolutely nothing left to lose. In 1915, this frustration boiled over. The farmers organized themselves into a political faction called the Nonpartisan League, or the NPL. They knew a third party would just split the rural vote and fail, so they tried something entirely different. They ran their own working-class farmers as candidates directly inside the existing Republican primaries, overriding the system from within. Led by organizers like Lynn Frazier, this grassroots coalition traveled farm to farm. They campaigned fiercely against the corporate establishment, promoting cooperative, collectivist solutions to the farmers' shared poverty. The strategy worked. By the 1918 elections, this coalition of immigrant wheat farmers had completely seized control of both houses of the North Dakota legislature and placed Lynn Frazier in the governor's seat. They couldn't outspend the monopolies, and they couldn't beat them in the open market. The only way to dismantle a rigged economic system was to legally hijack the political machinery. The NPL leveraged their new legislative power to physically replace out-of-state monopolies with state-run infrastructure. They established two crown jewels to anchor this new economy: the state-owned Bank of North Dakota and the North Dakota Mill and Elevator. The legislature didn't stop there. They passed a graduated state income tax that taxed unearned wealth at a higher rate, and they established a mandatory workers' compensation fund to protect laborers from corporate negligence. These new institutions broke the leverage of the Eastern creditors. With a state bank providing fair credit, farmers could finally finance their own homes, buy their own seed, and keep the profits from their harvests. The immigrant workforce had successfully reverse-engineered the state's entire purpose. They replaced an economy designed to export wealth to the East Coast with a cooperative system built to retain it locally. The corporate establishment in the cities naturally fought back. Conservative leaders organized an intense counterattack that eventually led to a historic recall election, removing Governor Frazier from office. To survive, the movement had to harden. Enter William Langer. He took the idealistic, grassroots energy of the early NPL and transformed it into a highly disciplined, ruthless political machine. When the Great Depression hit, Langer took aggressive action. He declared absolute debt moratoriums and ordered law enforcement to physically stop farm foreclosures. These tactics led to federal conspiracy charges against him, but they kept the farmers on their land and the NPL alive. By 1956, the political landscape evolved again. A group of insurgents merged the remaining NPL faction into the Democratic Party, establishing the modern two-party dynamic that still defines the state today. Railroad executives and bankers drew the borders and laid the tracks to build a massive financial trap. But it was the unified working-class uprising against that very trap that forged North Dakota's enduring, defiant political identity.